Hi everyone, welcome back to the How to Make Climate Change Sexy podcast, where I dive into conversations with guests who are using culture and innovation to address the climate crisis. Together we'll explore how their creative approaches can become powerful tools for driving the change our planet needs. I'm so excited for today's episode because we have an inspiring guest joining us, Sam from Kibbo Kift Agency. Sam's the founder of a PR agency that's making waves with creative campaigns that reframe the climate crisis in new and engaging ways. His work is a blend of his passion for social justice and deep knowledge of the PR industry, having spent years working with global brands like Levi's before pivoting to focus on climate and social impact. In our conversation today, we'll hear about Sam's journey from working in the fast-paced world of fashion and consumer PR to launching a boutique agency dedicated to promoting sustainability in ways that are both innovative and accessible. We'll also dig into the challenges of balancing impactful messaging with making it appealing to new audiences, and why he believes that creativity is key to shifting public perception. So whether you're a budding entrepreneur, a creative in the PR industry, or someone looking for fresh perspectives on how to address climate change, this episode's packed with insights on how to make sustainable messaging resonate with a broader audience. Plus, you'll hear about some of the standout campaigns that Sam's worked on, like the Big Plastic Count with Greenpeace and the thought-provoking Climate Clock project. So if you're ready to hear about how Sam's turning sustainability into something fresh, exciting, and yes, sexy, stay tuned. Let's jump into it. Hi, Sam. Thank you for coming on to Sexy Climate Change. Can you tell the listeners how you make the climate crisis sexy?
Hi, Izzy. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm Sam. I run a PR agency called Kibbo Kift Agency. And kind of our job and our remit is trying to work with like really engaging and creative campaigns that reframe the climate crisis in new and interesting ways. And part of that is so people and the general public can connect with the issues within the climate crisis in new ways, which I think is really needed.
And can you share a bit about your background? So you started in PR and social media, and then you shifted into creating Kibbo Kift Agency. Was there a single moment that made you decide that you wanted to be in the environmental sector, or was it more of like a slow development?
Yeah, I think it very much was like a slow development. My background is that I'm a third generation immigrant in the UK. I grew up on a big council estate, single mother. So yeah, we didn't have much money growing up. And I think kind of in that environment, you're very conscious and very aware of how much you rely on the state. So when it comes to elements like cheap transport to get to school, education maintenance allowance, which is a thing where you got 30 quid every week in your back pocket, cheaper tuition fees that I benefited from at the time, were all kind of decimated by the Tory government that came in. And I saw that happen in real time. And that was kind of like a really decisive moment for me, because from a really young age, I became really politically engaged. And then I started to look at other historical figures like Malcolm X and people like that I'd really look up to. So that was always within me. But at the same time, I really wanted to work on cool, creative campaigns. So it was really, there was a really interesting moment when I look back in my career when I was first interning. I was interning at an agency in Birmingham, but then also on the weekend, I was working 7 days a week at that time. On the weekend, I was spending my Sundays volunteering at a food shelter in Aston in Birmingham, which is like a low-income area. And within 3 months of that, I got my first internship in London, and I was on Red Church Street in Shoreditch, working at one of the coolest fashion agencies, working with like big global brands like Nike and Converse and stuff like that. And I just feel like the big shift and that big change I felt like the world I was in PR from a really early start moving to London was always quite vacuous, and it really didn't mean much. And it felt a bit weird, even though these are brands I've always wanted to work with. And yeah, so my background was moving to London, kind of agency hopping, building loads of experience in PR and social media as well. So I kind of worked within fashion, moved over to film PR for a bit, worked in arts PR, and then kind of landed at a big consumer agency in Soho, where I led Levi's for just under 3 years in the UK and the Nordics region, and then also launched an energy drink called Carabao, which sounds horrible, but they did a lot of sports sponsorship in like football. So for like a young 26, 27-year-old, it was a real kind of, it should have been like a dream job working in like music, culture, fashion, like it's exactly where I wanted to be. But within a couple of years of being in that role, there was that element where I was working on these big campaigns with loads of massive marketing budgets and working with loads of really cool celebrities and musicians. And it just wasn't doing anything for me. And it was really, really strange. So my girlfriend, who I work with in our studio at the moment, she got an internship at Acne Studios, and we moved over to Stockholm for a while. And when I was there, it was like that was kind of a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because it was like a society. I know Sweden has its issues and Stockholm has its issues, but their approach to like society and how they were living was so nice. And you could see environmentalism was like everywhere, not how the city was planned. And those conversations weren't really happening in the boardrooms, in the client chats that I was having with Levi's, which is one of the biggest denim producers in the world, even though they're doing good stuff, and other clients that I was working with at the time as well. And I just thought there was just something missing there. And when I started to learn more about the climate crisis, I kind of linked it more to social justice issues and how kind of the climate crisis will and already is disproportionately impacting working class communities in the UK, but also in the global south. I mentioned I'm a third generation immigrant, so my family's from India. Like the air pollution in Delhi is like one of the worst in the whole world, right? And that's caused by Western emissions largely as well. So it feels like there was loads of different elements that over the years kind of clicked for me, where I was like, this is the work that I need to be doing more of. And my experience working with big brands and how they move, how they operate, how they work, and the creativity that goes into some of their campaigns, I thought there was a bit of a space there to bring that over to the climate space, because all of the examples of companies and brands that I was seeing at the time in 2018, they were all quite kind of shit. And they were all quite like, I don't know, it was quite exclusive to somebody like me in the communities that I come from. And I thought there's a way to frame this, because really the people that are impacted by climate crisis the most are people like me, and there are people like where I come from. So yeah, there is that kind of that trope that exists now with like the climate crisis is a communications crisis. And I kind of do believe that. And I do believe it kind of takes some interesting ways to change the conversation to make it more appealing to more people. So yeah, I wouldn't say there was one kind of critical moment, but I think it was like a series of moments over time that made me realize like, here's a bit of an opportunity for somebody like me to have my own spin on this and see how it goes. So that's how I kind of created Kibbo Kift Agency. The name Kibbo Kift comes from the first intergenerational youth culture movement that happened in between, well, obviously World War I and World War II. And it was from a cartoonist called John Hargrave at the Evening Standard, who used to go to Epping Forest and created like a utopian society. Created his own like costumes and own rules and ways of living that was really utopian, really progressive at the time for in the 20s and 30s. And it's actually a piece of British history that a lot of people don't know about, but it's really, really progressive. So I've got like a little catalogue of all the books that I've collected from them. And that's what I've based my name on and the agency name on.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's kind of like how in I'm not sure when it started, but it's had a resurgence now, like the Leftist Book Club and having really cheap, accessible social theory books. What I liked about what you said is it really sounds like your journey into the environmental sector feels like such a culmination of everything that you love and you're interested in. And I definitely relate to that feeling of working in the creative sector and being like, this is really fun, this is great, I'm doing cool things. And it's so easy to just keep on that train, but then you come home at night and you're like, okay, I've made something cool, but what have I actually done? Or like, have I just helped to sell things? Am I part of the problem is a difficult one. And I think you're so right when you talk about reframing it for different communities. I think definitely pre-2018, I mean, I'm a white middle class person, but I wasn't even interested because I was like, this is giving crunchy granola, Hugh Fearnley Whittingstall, country file. I have to like hiking. I need to enjoy being muddy and not be at a festival. Like it just wasn't really clicking for anyone apart from that very specific margin. So I guess it would be great if you could tell me more about Kibbo Kift Agency. Like, what is the core mission and how do you go about achieving that core mission?
Yeah, I mean, talking about kind of your influences, I remember finding out when like Jamie was vegan and I was like, shit, that's so cool that somebody on the grime scene kind of cares so much, right? So yeah, and I think a big part of that as well is like seeing different figures in the space like Akala. I remember when Akala was really outspoken a few years ago around Brexit and kind of linking it to colonialism, which I thought was really, really, that was quite inspiring for somebody like me to see that as well. So Kibbo Kift Agency, yeah, so our core mission as a PR agency is promoting products, brands, charities, industry pressure groups. Over the last few years, we've definitely gone more into the way of charities and industry pressure groups. A lot of what we're known for in the industry is kind of those creative comms campaigns. So anything that's really kind of highly creative, we usually get a lot of inbounds around those. There aren't many, but when we do, our kind of name has been known for that now, which I think is pretty cool. So yeah, the range is pretty broad. I mean, at the start of the year, we worked on a huge campaign with Greenpeace called The Big Plastic Count, which was incredible. To think of like a small agency like mine working with Greenpeace was like a huge moment. So I was really, really proud of that. And then kind of moving on to tech products as well. So we launched Surrey, which is like an eco-friendly toothbrush, which has been everywhere. We launched
I've seen those.
Yeah, we launched it in the UK and that's been like a massive success. They've done like a great job and they've expanded over to the US now. So you can see there, just with those two examples, like the range and breadth of our work. Obviously, with Surrey and a toothbrush and a fashion product, there is an element of consumerism that we've got to battle there. And I think there is a way that we can consume in a much more clever and effective way if those products are good. So Surrey is a great example. It's a circular product where you only need that one toothbrush effectively for the rest of your life and you don't have to keep buying different ones. So we feel like that's a really, really great swap that people can do and act in real life where you can make a positive change and it's a cool product. So yeah, I mean, our work is measured in PR performance really. So it's exposure of our clients, getting them exposure in media articles, newspaper publications, on TV. Yeah, that's the work that we do.
Yeah, it really makes me think that for sustainability to take off and sustainable products to take off, they have to be fun, they have to be sexy, but they also have to be good. Like anyone that's buying something just because it's sustainable is already buying sustainable items. So you really have to capture that slightly curious audience. How do you find getting to those people that you know are maybe like 20% of the way there?
Well, I think it very much depends on the product. Right, Surrey is a great example because people see that and they're just blown away by the design first and how premium it feels. And then they realize there's all these sustainability benefits to the product. So I do think that's like part of the work that we do as well, is that we only want to work with these brands that have that message of, yeah, they're really cool and they look really nice first. And then maybe that's sustainability messaging or the eco-friendly credentials is like a secondary, because we feel like if you go just with sustainability as the first point, you kind of turn a lot of people off. So you kind of have to Trojan horse it a bit in there. So I think in order to kind of reach the masses, you need to, yeah, you're totally right. I think our mission isn't to appeal to the people that are already converted. It's the people that haven't converted yet.
Yeah, it's like an eat your vegetables approach, hiding the broccoli in the pasta sauce kind of thing. How do you vet these brands when they come to you and they say, Sam, we'd love to work with you. We have this campaign. What are the things that you do to make sure that you're not contributing to greenwashing?
That's a really good question. I'm probably going to disappoint on this, but like all of our growth, apart from a couple of brands, has been through word of mouth. So we just get referred from these climate networks that we're in, our current clients that refer us to different work. And normally it's pretty obvious if it's like a pressure group or a brand, if they're doing really, really good things and they're progressive, we can kind of tell straight off the bat what they're doing. I've never had to get a textbook out and compare them to like the SDGs, for instance, like because we're pretty known in the space. I think I've only once got a brief through and I could tell it was very clear greenwashing from a big brand. So yeah, we don't have like criteria internally, but between me and the team, I think we kind of know if that brand's good or not, or that product's good or not.
Yeah, and I guess there's a sense coming to your website, there's so many markers that you're not going to take on a client that's dodgy. Like you have your slow factory elements on there, you have your climate countdown clock. It's very clear that if it's someone that's coming to you for the wrong reasons, you probably will just say thanks, but no thanks.
Exactly that. Yeah. I mean, the reason why I started Kibbo Kift Agency is literally so I could go to bed at night and not worry that I'm not creating impact for the right reasons. For the wrong reason, sorry. So yeah, for that, I mean, doing any form of greenwashing is completely against our values and my own values as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Greenpeace, the big plastic count. Can you give me an example of a campaign or a project that you've worked on recently that you feel like has really effectively communicated the urgency of the climate crisis?
Yeah, the big plastic count was a really great example. I mean, that was the biggest household survey on household plastic consumption in the UK. So many people contributed towards that. And we got so many great results. And working with Greenpeace, obviously, their kind of span of influence is great. So getting media coverage was quite challenging, but it was really, really good. And we were able to do a really great job. I think more recently, I mean, at the time of recording, we're 3 days off the Earth's hottest day. And just coincidentally, one of our clients is called the Climate Clock, and they're like the biggest digital clock face in New York. And they have like handheld versions of a clock that counts down to how long we've got to pass 1.5. So it's kind of like an art installation tool that we've been working with for the past 3 years. And I think that's probably a recent example of kind of communicating the urgency of the climate crisis, looking at those numbers. One of the challenges that we have with the Climate Clock is that people see it as anxiety inducing. And we always have like an internal pressure internally to like figure out whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether that creates hope and change or whether it kind of turns people off. But ultimately, the message on the clock is how long we've got to communicate to world leaders, how long we've got left to kind of take action and act in time, so to speak. So we created a day, a global awareness day called Climate Emergency Day, which was kind of marking the moment that the time ticks over into a brand new climate year on the clock. So like I said, that happened on the 22nd of July. And that was the third time we've done that kind of annual moment. I think we've done a pretty good job with that. I mean, we were on Good Morning Britain a few times this week, which is the UK's kind of largest morning breakfast show. We got loads of coverage in the US where people were linking the numbers to the US presidential election. And basically the last 4 years we've got to pass 1.5, which is the numbers on the clock is determined by the next presidency and the next candidate that comes in. So yeah, we've done, I think using that as the most recent example is a really good one.
Yeah, I think it's really effective. I think especially now that it has fallen into like one political term, it really feels like it puts the pressure onto the politicians. And I think also onto the public to make those demands. Like I remember a few months ago, I was on a first date and the guy said to me, "Do you think the climate crisis is going to affect our kids?" And I went, "It's happening now." Like, I don't understand how you can push it off so far. And I've had conversations since where people will be like, "Oh, but it'll only be our grandchildren." I think having something as familiar as a clock telling you that it's basically now and we really only have 4 years is really important. I think the way to guard against the anxiety or the hopelessness is to then capture that anxiety and say, "Okay, you're feeling anxious? Here's your call to action. Here are some things you can demand." It's about not abandoning people once they have those big emotional responses.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think kind of going back to the topic of trying to make it sexy, there's a fine balance between sexy and being impactful and kind of the shock value of something, right? And I think that's something that people struggle to understand is that shock value and how urgent it actually is. Because I think we were speaking before the recording of like how people struggle to comprehend all of the complexities of the climate crisis. And I think the climate clock is a really good way to kind of distill that really succinctly into one kind of number where you can see how long you've got left. And it's quite a universal message, isn't it? If you realize that's how long we've got left on the clock. So yeah, it's obviously a bit dystopian to know that you've got less than 4 years. And yeah, we're already thinking about how to make the most of the moment that it passes over into 1.5. So yeah, it's a real interesting challenge with them.
What are some things that you do to like safeguard yourself against burnout? Because I'm reading a great book at the moment called Radical Rest. It's by Evie Muir, and she talks about like the difficulty of working in this space and the importance of actually looking after yourself. I mean, it's like a very central thing in a lot of Black feminism about like rest and care and love. And is there anything that you do for yourself to kind of guard against that burnout?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And yeah, very unsexily, like it's impacted my physical health. Like I've got some long-term health issues that I've had as like, I think compounding stress has kind of accelerated that. It's not something that I'm good at, is to kind of give myself that break and try to kind of, prevent burnout. I think I probably burnt out like 3 or 4 times a year because of the work that I do. Working in this space, one of the biggest challenges is that our clients don't have money, right? So if we're talking about my previous background of working with big brands, they have loads of money to spend on these marketing campaigns. They have like big influencer campaigns. They do like 12-month contracts with the agency. So there's some level of security there. Whereas the clients that I work with just don't have that. They don't have the kind of amount of money to employ a marketing agency to come on board for like 2 years and give them some level of security. It just doesn't work that way in this space, which is something I really didn't anticipate when I started this agency, but it's something that doesn't allow me to take much of a break. So like last year, for instance, I think I only had a week off. This year so far, I've only had a week off as well, which I know is really bad. And it was my actual New Year's resolution, if people do that, to give myself more time off this year, and I haven't been able to. So yeah, it's a big one. And yeah, I haven't really quite cracked that yet. I think there's an element of also, to bring it back into the class issue, of being working class and always having to feel like you need to do more definitely runs through me. So yeah, that doesn't kind of, I struggle to switch off and I struggle to kind of give myself that break. And yeah, I might seem a bit intense because of that. But yeah, it's kind of what I need to do to run this business and create impact, essentially. There's also that element where I feel guilty for not working because I could be creating impact for my clients. So it's not like a cutthroat approach to like a meaningless product or brand that you're promoting where it's like, I need to take a week off and just detach from that, where there could be a political speech that we need to respond to, or the UNSG might do a comment piece that we need to react to from one of our clients. I mean, sometimes that's really, really hard to predict when those moments are going to happen or when you need to plan for them. So yeah, it's really, I need to learn more, and I'd love to borrow that book off you.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I've been shouting about it to everyone. I think it's also that nexus of being somewhat a creative freelancer. This is definitely what I have, like as a creative freelancer who also works in communications for NGO clients. You don't have that same cutoff. You're not like, fuck it, this is about a pair of trainers, I'm gonna have my evening off, because you do care. You're in this field because you care about it. So I think that also makes it much harder. I guess while we're like on the topic of challenges, what do you think's the biggest challenge you face working in an industry like PR, but also trying to move towards a world of less consumption. I think that must be a tension that you feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's not one that I feel as much because of the clients that we work with. Like, because I know we're promoting good products, it's one that I don't have to worry about as much in terms of the trade-off between doing, like, I'm working in a traditionally terrible industry, right, when it comes to capitalism, but I kind of hope that I'm kind of flipping that with the model that I'm working within, right? So, like, we also manage Facebook ads and do creative for some clients as well. And it's kind of like we feel like we're flipping that traditional model of consumerism in a really, really positive way because we're promoting good products or charities, or we're like creating petitions. So from that side, I don't really feel as bad. But ultimately, it's the challenges that we face is probably around budgets and kind of the media landscape as well. Like over the last 5 years, journalism is dying in a way, or it's definitely evolving and transforming in a way that's not as good because there's less opinion out there. So from our side, when we see kind of the media landscape dwindling, it presents a challenge because our kind of reason of being is to get coverage. But if that window of journalists that you can appeal to is getting smaller and it's shrinking and shrinking, then it becomes a much harder task. So yeah, and that will kind of deem us ineffective if we can't successfully translate a story to media properly because they don't have the headspace to receive our stories in itself. So yeah, it's budgets, I think, is the biggest one that impacts our industry and the work that we do. And also just the media landscape as well. I think if you're a young person looking to become a journalist nowadays, I would probably advise you to sidestep that and just come straight into PR and find like-minded agencies or like-minded people to collaborate with, or brands that you really, really want to promote, and just try and work for them instead. Because I think journalism in 10 years is going to be a really hard thing to make a living off.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a dance. I think it's that kind of divide between commercial work and personal work. Before I did a lot more of this, I was working as a photographer, and that was even worse because people don't want to pay for images because it feels like such a thing everyone can do. And there's, I think in the same way that we're losing really, really good writers and articles, we're losing really good imagery as well because of that reluctance.
AI certainly doesn't help that as well, because I think that's just going to, the quality, I mean, an AI image now is pretty laughable, isn't it? Like, it looks terrible. But if in 10 years time, I'd imagine that's going to increase dramatically, where it's going to be hard to tell what's fake and what's not anymore. That, I mean, even with Trump being shot like a couple of weeks ago, people were like, was that fake? Was that a fake video? And I know there's some discrepancies around recent Biden videos walking around, and people are like, that's a fake Biden that's walking around. And I think that kind of, I suppose that's another element of media that we've got to grapple with, is the overall distrust with media as well. People don't really trust media as much as they did like 20, 30 years ago. So that's another thing where we're trying to tell like really compelling messages and try to inform the public around a climate crisis, but then there's kind of levels of distrust there. Then that's another challenge that we've got to try and beat.
Yeah, like misinformation, especially when it comes to climate. I think there's a lot of untrustworthy sources out there.
It's really funny because, I mean, I mentioned the climate clock earlier on and how we got that onto Good Morning Britain. And Laura Tobin, who's the weather presenter, who's like, I think she's like I would think the UK's most famous weather person. On Twitter, when she's posted it, I mean, the amount of trolls that she gets is just horrendous. Like, it's so, so bad. And in contrast, you post it on LinkedIn and everyone's loving it. It's really interesting to see like how the social platforms between the two like are so divided. So yeah, you're right. There's not only the mistrust there, but when you add like a shitload of trolls on top of it, it's hard to tell what's right and wrong. It's the same as Palestine as well. Like, how much you see what's happening is so horrific, but then you look online and there's people that are in some way defending it. To me, that's absolutely mind-blowing. So it just goes to show, I mean, yeah, when we talk about kind of echo chambers, is being really aware of loads of different opinions. Like, something that I try and do is read the Mail, and I hate buying the Sun, but sometimes I buy the Sun just to read like the different point of view in PR and journalism, because that's my job. But you really do kind of develop an understanding of how attitudes and views are very different across the country or across the world.
Yeah, and you mentioned that earlier before we started recording, because you're based in Worcester, and you were saying how a lot of PR agencies end up being quite London-centric, and the personas they're building are Londoners, and it's about kind of breaking through that. And I think that's especially important talking about climate. It's like, how can you get to new communities? How can you make it accessible? How can you make it interesting? How can you make people feel included? Like, it's also their issue. I loved what you said earlier about how all of the aspects of your identity actually mean that you're incredibly well positioned to care about climate, but it took a while to click.
100%. Yeah. I think that's an issue that we've got in media as a whole, is that it's very London centric. So I think there's been some progressive moves. I know like Channel 4 moved to Leeds, and the BBC is based in Manchester now as well, which I think is a really positive thing. But when it comes to the work that we do, from PRs, you need to have an understanding of the broader world. You can't just be trapped in a little bubble. Like, you need to have an understanding of, I know there's a famous line in Succession, isn't there? I don't know if you watch Succession, when Logan Roy kind of shouts his younger kid, I can't remember his name now, Macaulay Culkin's brother, around like, do you know the price of a pint of milk? And it's kind of like that kind of similar thing where a lot of people that are working in the industry in London kind of don't really know what it's like further up north. And like, if you're trying to communicate a national message, you need to know how people live. You need to know what their experiences are. You need to know about the class struggles as well of working class people. So yeah, I always felt when it comes to that authenticity challenge of me going to London and feeling like I fit in there, that's kind of part of the reason why I never really did. So yeah, that's the struggle that I built. Also, I wanted to prove to myself that you can run an effective comms shop from outside of London as well. You didn't need all the bells and whistles of a central London agency. And I think, yeah, I'm really quite happy that I've proved that to myself now.
Yeah, and I guess in the evolution of the working world post-COVID is that we are a lot more remote, and there is a lot more flexibility in where you can be like, it does open up new opportunities for you to be able to do this, because I'm guessing this would have been a lot harder 5 years ago when people really wanted to see someone in person.
Yeah, 100%. I think I was quite happy to be ahead of the curve on that one. Like I said, when I moved to Stockholm, my agency that I was working with, I was like one of the first they ever allowed to do remote working. This was like in 2017. And it was like, how is this not a thing that people can just do and appreciate? And then obviously COVID happened and a lot more people did it. But yeah, I think it opens up space. And also it's just expertise for me as well. Like, we work with freelancers in like New York. We work with freelancers across the world when it comes to specific campaigns. So like, that's just the reality of our world nowadays. There's no reason not to take advantage of that. There is a benefit, like some of my team are based in London, which I think is like, I feel more comfortable with having some people on the ground in London in case they need to go to client meetings. But yeah, it's certainly not a necessity anymore. And like I said, a lot of the work that we do, I think 4 of our clients right now are based in the US. And we've always had loads of clients in the US over the years as well. And they've come to us because of our niche in the industry and the work that we do, not because we're based where they are. And they want to help tell a global message. I think another benefit that I've got specifically of being in the UK as a whole is that the UK media landscape is quite strong. It translates globally. So if you get a hit in the Independent or the Guardian, that is global news, essentially. So people from different countries really value the British media landscape, which I think is also quite interesting.
Yeah. I guess one of my final questions, which is maybe a hard one, around using creativity, we did touch on it earlier about that strain between making something sexy and making something impactful. How do you balance having a creative campaign, but also communicating the urgency and seriousness of the climate crisis?
I think inherently it needs to have a thread in there. Anything creative needs to make people think. So I think if you can provoke thought, I think that is ultimately it's the sexiest thing that you can do, is try and provoke a thought in somebody that's going to stick with them and resonate with them. So I think like a really good example that I saw recently, that wasn't a campaign that we worked on, was like the Nature is an Artist campaign, the Spotify one that happened. Like, I thought that was such a great way to get that message across to people, where it's like, oh, nature is an artist. What does this mean? You dig into it, you find out the royalties go to support nature projects. And I think that's a really, really cool thing to do. Similarly, I mean, yeah, we worked with the Climate Science Translated project, which was when we paired famous climate scientists next to famous comedians, and we got them to translate the climate science message of the comedians. And that was Joe Brand and Nish Kumar that did that. And that was like, again, that's a really great way to deliver some form of an injection of creativity using humor, which is, we talk about that Trojan horse in, it's using humor as that vehicle to do so, which I think is really cool. Or like a huge data story, like when we worked with the big plastic count, like that's real big numbers that are reflective of British society, that I think like a 1 in 4 number is always like really, really appealing to people when you think of the impact that you can have. So yeah, I think what we kind of try to do is just make sure that process is really collaborative and just try and push the boundaries as much as possible when it comes to messaging as well.
Yeah, I think definitely kind of envelope pushing is really important. And obviously I would, but I agree with you about humor. I think humor is such an interesting space because it offers a way of holding darkness and difficulty, but without provoking too much anxiety, but you're still getting that urgency across. I think it's a very interesting form of communication, but also quite difficult to do without it seeming a bit cringe. I think that's the eternal challenge. So for anyone listening to this who is working in the PR world and wants to pivot towards climate crisis communication or more climate-based projects, what advice would you give them?
Well, I'd say the first piece of advice is look at the agencies that you're working with. So we kind of are responsible for the industry pressure in the PR and advertising world because we've worked with Clean Creatives, which is a campaign that is like an anti-fossil fuel campaign for the industry. So we created a pledge for agencies to sign that says they will refuse to work with fossil fuel contracts. And every single year we work with the Clean Creatives team to bring out a report called the F list, which exposes all of the agencies that currently work with fossil fuels. So rule number one is look at the Clean Creatives website to make sure any agencies that you're working with or you might apply for are not on that list, because if they are, then and it's also surprising because it's all of the big names, all of the big agencies work with fossil fuel contracts, like the big six. And also you can apply that. We're just solely focused on the fossil fuel industry there. But if you apply that to other high polluting industries, you'll probably find there's not many agencies that you can actually apply for to work with, because they've either got like an aviation client or they might have a secret tobacco client kind of tucked in their back pocket. Twice in my short career working in London, I was approached to work on a tobacco client, which is crazy. So yeah, I'd probably make sure that the agencies that you're applying to work for are kind of vetted in some way. You can use the Clean Creatives website as a resource for that, or you can just do some digging yourself and just ask yourself whether, if you was put on any of the clients that that agency works with, whether you'd be happy promoting that product. So yeah, that's the first thing I'd probably recommend. And secondly, yeah, just look at the good people in the industry doing good work instead. Obviously, we're an agency that does good work. There's also plenty of others. Greenhouse is a really good PR agency. The Good Agency, we've kind of done some work with them recently on pressuring B Corp and B Lab on their accreditation standards in the industry. Futera are a great communications consultancy. So there are good guys that exist. It's pretty hard to get into them because, as I mentioned, there's not much money there, but there are a few good people doing good work in this space. The alternative is that you go in-house and there's loads of brands, obviously loads of brands doing good stuff. And it's usually the big charities and big organizations that have the resource to hire an in-house PR. So I'd probably look there as well. But the biggest thing is just, yeah, I speak to a lot of people that have made that decision internally that the work that they're doing doesn't represent their values. And ultimately, the PR industry is responsible for that. So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one to navigate, but I suppose you've just got to try and put yourself out there and gain as much experience as you possibly can. And look, you can start your own thing. That's what I did. Like, there's nothing stopping you from kind of starting your own consultancy, starting your own agency, trying to bag a couple of clients against a new biz process that we're kind of pitching up against as well. I would totally welcome that. I mean, the ultimate goal for us is to not exist as an agency, really, because the industry has moved on so far that it's not promoting bad products or harmful clients. So yeah, I'd probably recommend people to do that as well.
I think a lot of that does come from ability to attract good talent. It's like if good talent starts saying, no, I'm not working on this project, or no, I'm not going to work with you because of X, Y, Z, it completely shifts how the agencies themselves approach things, because they then have a staffing issue and then they have to really interrogate themselves. So I think that was all really great advice. For anyone that wants to see your work further, what are your social handles, or are there any places you'd recommend they go?
Yeah, right. Kibbo Kift Agency. That's our kind of social handles across everything. We're doing a bit of a rebrand at the moment, so that should hopefully be live in the next couple of months. But yeah, website's around, LinkedIn's around, my Instagram's around, even though I'm not too active on it. But yeah, and obviously, if anybody wants to chat, just drop me a message. I'd love to tell people more about the work that we do.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for coming on to How to Make Climate Change Sexy, Sam. It was so great to speak to Sam today, and it was incredible hearing about his journey from traditional PR to creating the Kibbo Kift Agency, and also how he uses creative storytelling to make the climate conversation more accessible and impactful. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find the links to the accounts mentioned in the show notes. Also, be sure to follow Sexy Climate Change on Instagram, where I'll be sharing more about Kibbo Kift's recent campaigns, like the Big Plastic Count and the Climate Clock, so keep an eye out for those posts. And just a quick note, as an independent production, your support on Instagram and podcast platforms helps to keep the podcast going. Every like, share and comment makes a huge difference. So thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss our next episode. We have more incredible guests lined up who are transforming the climate conversation in surprising ways. See you next time.